Okay, so we're going to talk about present value today and how it relates to workers' compensation calculations. In the calculator section of the WorkCompCentral website, we have a number of functions that rely on present value calculations to derive the correct amount. And usually this is in relation to a commutation. So commutation will be used when somebody wants to settle an annuity or a series of payments in a lump sum. In order to do that, we have to take those series of payments and what they call discount it to present value. And a lot of people don't understand what present value is all about. So what I'm going to do here today is not show you how to use the calculators. That's not the purpose here. The purpose is to show you how present value works. So when you get a question about what the present value is, you can explain it rather intelligently, or just point them to this video because this will explain it, hopefully in pretty simple terms. So that's what we're going to do here today. So what is present value? Because that's the first question, because most people don't quite understand what that is. So basically, present value just recognizes that the purchasing power of a dollar today is not the same as it is tomorrow. A dollar today is worth more than it is tomorrow simply because of inflation. Put another way, what costs a dollar today will cost more than a dollar in the future. And here's a quick example. Everybody buys gasoline. So when I was a kid filling up my motorcycle in 1970, gasoline cost about 36 cents a gallon. Pretty cheap. If you go and purchase gasoline today, not last year because it was a lot more expensive, but if you go buy it today, especially if you're outside of California, it's about $2.50 a gallon. So what that really means is that back in 1970, if I had a dollar and I was going to go buy gasoline, I could buy 2.8 gallons of gasoline with that dollar. If I have a dollar today, though, I can only buy a few teaspoons worth of gasoline. So in other words, if you compare the purchasing power of a dollar in 1970 compared to what a dollar would buy now in 2016, you have about 88% less purchasing power today than you did in 1970. And that's because stuff costs more today. Okay, so that's a pretty simple concept to understand. And if you understand that, then it's really simple to see that because the dollar has 88% less purchasing power today than it did in 1970, it stands to reason that ultimately that 1970 dollar isn't going to be able to buy anything, right? Eventually, it's going to end up in a de minimis amount or essentially a net zero amount. So you wonder, how can that happen? Because I thought a dollar is a dollar. Well, the reason a dollar is not really a dollar is because it's fictional. The dollar simply represents what we ascribe value to it. But because value is always changing over time, then a dollar can't buy what it used to. And eventually it goes to zero depending upon what the rate of return is. So I found this neat little graph, and this shows you how ultimately a dollar, or in this case $100, and you can extrapolate it to a dollar, it's the same value, it doesn't matter, is valueless after about 50 years if you assume a 10% rate of return, or an interest rate. 10% pretty much after about 40 years at a 10% interest rate, a dollar is worth almost nothing. Okay? So that's critical in understanding the present value calculation, and here's why. These are the calculators where present value comes into play on our system. So commutation of permanent disability, commutation of a life pension award, commutation of permanent total disability, commutation of death benefits, the present value of an award with a life pension, or the present value of the life pension or the medical itself without any additional payments. So we run into this most often when there is a commutation of a permanent disability award with a life pension tacked on. So here's how this all works. When you have an award of permanent disability, that means that the recipient will get whatever the amount is. It's usually around $230 a week for a set period of time. And then when that permanent disability award runs out, then the life pension kicks in. So an example might be, like I have keyed in here, an 87% permanent disability rating, which means that that person's going to get $230 a week for a certain period of time, like 10 or 12 years, and I forget exactly what it is. And then after that runs out, then the life pension kicks in at whatever is applicable for this wage rate and this level of permanent disability. And then we enter an annual interest rate. The annual interest rate is the rate of return that we would expect somebody with a lump sum of money to invest it at. And that's variable. Right now, a good rate of return is 3%. You can't get that in your bank account. I don't know if you've noticed, your savings accounts, you're lucky to get like 0.5%. It's usually about 0.3%. The stock market right now is only returning about maybe 4%. U.S. Treasury bonds are at about 1 or 2%. So we assume a 3% rate of return for current day investments simply because, well, that's a pretty good rate of return. If we were doing this 12 years ago or 15 years ago, then a good assumption on a rate of return would be closer to 10%. Probably about 7 or 8%, because that's what the inflation rate was. That's what the investment, a conservative investment would return. And then in California, we also have an adjustment to the life pension based on the state average weekly wage. And that's the Baker decision, which was old case law. It's explained on the website. So over the history of tracking the state average weekly wage, the average tends to be about 4%, give or take a little bit. So I put in 4%. So I assumed a 3% rate of return on my investment, which is the annual interest rate, and a 4% increase in the state average weekly wage. And this is calculated out over time. So when I get that return, this is the data that comes back. I'm a 57-year-old male. And from today's date, when I did the calculation to the start of the life pension, I still have about 9.5 more years of permanent disability to pay out. After that 9.5 years stops, then the life pension starts paying out. The key to these calculations and what people get confused about is the present value of life pension is stated in week terms. So in this case, it's about 360 weeks worth of life pension that has been reduced. And here's where the confusion comes in. Because if you divide those 357 weeks by 52 weeks in a year, that means that the present value of that life pension is worth about 6.9 years worth of payments. But if you go look at my age on a life table, I should be seeing about 16.5 years of payments, right? So how come I'm not getting 16.5 years of payments and I'm only getting 6.8 years of payments? Well, it's because ultimately the present value of that dollar goes to zero and there's nothing left to pay out on it. Okay, does that make sense to you now? So I'm going to go back. We go back and look at this chart. This chart shows you that when you invest $100 or when you're paying out $100 and that's going to be a set annuity payment, $100 every month or every week, or doesn't matter what it is, for 40 years, ultimately that $100 can't buy anything. And it's because gasoline is, about 400 times more expensive than it was in 1970. So it's the same basic concept. So when you get a question about the weeks of present value, and this comes up all the time, the reason is because ultimately a dollar will not buy anything after a period of time. So this is another way to look at it. This is one of our other calculators, and this is simply what the present value is of an annuity payment. And the reason I used $100 per week is because it's easy to calculate $100 and see what the differences are. So if I input $100 a week, and my life expectancy based on the current U.S. life tables that are authorized by California law, I've got 22 years left, which I think is, I better live past 79. But 22 years left at an annual interest rate of 3% gives me a present value of that annuity payment of about $84,000. In other words, there's about 16 years of payments that would occur before that value reaches zero, even though I'm going to live another 6 years. Okay? Now, watch what happens when we change the interest rate to 10%. When we change it to 10%, the lump sum value is much, much less. Now it's only $46,000. And the reason is, again, because if I was able to get 10% return on my money, then I would be able to maintain that $100 per week annuity payment for the duration of my life if I get that return on my money. Conversely, if the rate of inflation was 10%, then that $46,000 would only last about 9 years because I don't have any purchasing power left in it. Okay, so does that make sense? Okay, good. So in summary, permanent disability payments are an annuity because they're a set dollar amount. Over a period of time, it doesn't change. When you have a permanent disability or life pension award, that number doesn't change except for as adjusted by the state average weekly wage, and we accommodate that in our present value or in our commutation calculation. Present value recognizes that a dollar today is not worth the same as it is tomorrow, that tomorrow's dollar is worth much less than a dollar today. Two birds in the hand are better than one bird in the tree type of thing, or I forget what. One bird in the hand is better than two birds in the tree, right? Eventually, a dollar loses all of its purchasing power, or at least it's so little that it can't be, that it's basically useless. And lump sum payments of an annuity string are reduced to present value. So if you just remember that present value is a reduction of those annuity payments, it's a good way to think of it is they are, all those annuity payments are consolidated. And the assumption is that that lump sum will then be invested to generate the same rate of return. So whether it's 3% or 10%, the assumption when you get a lump sum of money is that you're going to reinvest it. You're not just going to spend it, because that's what the purpose of that annuity payment is to provide for a lifetime of payments to maintain that purchasing power. And then finally, the higher the rate of return, the lower the lump sum is going to be necessary to maintain those string of annuity payments. Okay? Do we have any questions? And it's okay to ask questions. Now's the time to do it because we're still recording. Nope. Okay. Class dismissed. Great. Thanks, guys.